knew my family didn't really see me, but nothing prepared me for what my mother, Beatrice, said that night. She leaned back in her chair, eyes cold, and told me, "Don't expect anything from us." My brother Julian actually smiled like he'd been waiting to watch me break. I didn't. I stayed completely still, even as the room tightened around me. Something in the silence felt different, like someone else had finally heard enough. And just when Beatrice thought she'd won, a chair scraped behind her, slow, deliberate. That was the moment everything shifted, though none of them realized it yet. My name is Eleanor, and for most of my life, I thought staying quiet was the safest way to survive my own family. I grew up in a small house in Seattle where the walls were thin, the expectations were heavy, and the affection felt rationed. Beatrice used to say she treated us equally, but even as a kid, I could see the tilt in the scales. My brother Julian got the bigger slices of cake, the newer shoes, the louder praise. I got what was left after the dust settled. I learned early not to ask for much. When Julian wanted something, a school trip, a new jacket, Beatrice made it happen, no matter the cost. When I needed help with college applications or a ride to my part-time job, the answer was usually, "You're old enough to figure it out." So, I did. I worked late shifts, saved every dollar, and told myself that independence was a badge of honor, not a sentence. Arthur was the single exception. He was steady, patient, and never made me feel like loving me was a chore. His place always smelled like pine and old books. And every time I visited, he'd smile and say, "You look tired, sweetheart. Sit. Tell me everything." I didn't tell him everything, of course, but he listened to the pieces I was brave enough to share. As I got older, the favoritism didn't fade. It sharpened. Beatrice spoke about Julian like he was the sun we all orbited. She covered his unpaid bills, co-signed his leases, and bought him out of problems he created. I kept my distance, working in office administration downtown, keeping my head down, living small because I never wanted to need anything from them. But the imbalance grew impossible to ignore. Little comments piled up, jokes about how Julian was the one who'd carry the family name, hints that I should step aside when decisions were made. Even during holidays, I felt like furniture, present, useful, but unnoticed. Still, I kept showing up. That's what you do when you hope a family might one day choose you back. When Arthur invited us all to a winter dinner at Beatrice's house, I thought it was just another holiday gathering. He'd been tired lately, moving slower, relying on me more for doctor visits and errands. I assumed he just wanted us all in one place to feel close again. But when I walked into the dining room that evening, something in the air felt heavy, like everyone already knew a script I hadn't been handed. I just didn't realize the lines they were about to deliver would change everything. By the time dinner started, the tension in the room felt thick enough to chew. Beatrice moved around the table with the confidence of someone who believed she already owned the night. Julian lounged back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, barely acknowledging anyone. Arthur sat quietly at the end of the table, hands folded, eyes sharper than they looked a moment earlier. I took my seat near him, the only place that ever felt remotely safe. Small talk died quickly. Beatrice brought out the food, set the dishes down a little too forcefully, then cleared her throat like she was preparing for a speech she'd rehearsed. I felt my stomach tighten. She had that expression, the one she wore before delivering a decision she expected everyone else to accept without question. So, she began, picking up her glass, "I think it's time we talk about the future of this family." Julian straightened up, suddenly interested. Arthur didn't move. I stayed quiet. Beatrice launched into a long explanation about responsibility and keeping things in order, words she liked to use when she really meant control. She talked about the house, finances, long-term decisions, all while Julian nodded like a politician pretending to understand a bill he hadn't read. Then she looked directly at me. "Eleanor," she said, sounding almost bored. "We've agreed that your brother will take care of everything moving forward." "Everything?" I repeated, keeping my voice even. She shrugged. "He's the more stable one, more committed to the family, so yes." Julian smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting like a kid who'd just been handed someone else's birthday present. I felt the humiliation burn low in my chest, but I kept my expression still. He liked when I reacted. Beatrice liked it even more. I folded my hands on the table. "And me?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Beatrice didn't hesitate. "Don't expect anything from us." Just like that. Cold, final, delivered with the same tone someone might use to say, "Pass the salt." It was the kind of sentence that didn't echo, it stabbed. The room went painfully quiet. Julian leaned back, satisfied. Beatrice adjusted her napkin like she just completed an item on her to-do list. And me, I sat there, feeling the familiar weight press into my ribs. I'd heard 1,000 subtle versions of that message my entire life. But hearing it out loud, formal, public, felt like being erased in real time. I inhaled through my nose, slow and steady. I stayed calm. Calm in a way that didn't feel like defeat anymore. Calm like clarity. Calm like something in me finally clicking into place. I glanced at Arthur, expecting sympathy. What I saw instead was something else entirely, recognition, focus, and a quiet, simmering disappointment not directed at me. He shifted in his seat just slightly, but enough for me to realize he wasn't going to let this slide. And without knowing it, Beatrice had just crossed the one line that would cost her everything. The rest of the dinner went on like nothing had happened, at least for them. Beatrice kept talking about Julian's plans. Julian kept bragging about things he hadn't achieved, and I sat there letting their voices melt into meaningless noise. But underneath that stillness, something in me was shifting quietly, steadily, like the slow crack of ice in deep water. When I excused myself to help clear the dishes, Beatrice followed me into the kitchen. She didn't come to apologize. She came to reinforce her decision. "You're not upset, are you?" she asked, slicing into the question with false concern. "I mean, you're independent. You always take care of yourself." There it was again, that same twisted praise that meant, you don't matter as much. I dried my hands on a towel. "I heard what you said." She looked relieved, as if I had finally accepted my place. "Good. It's better for everyone this way." Everyone, meaning her, meaning Julian, never me. Behind her, Julian leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching like a spectator at a show he thought already had its ending. "It's not personal, Eleanor," he said. "It's just obvious. You don't need anything." I met his eyes for the first time that night. "Maybe I don't," I said softly. He frowned, confused by my lack of fight. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively and headed back toward the dining room. "Let's finish dessert," she said. "Arthur wants to talk before he leaves." Arthur, the only name in this house that didn't make my shoulders tense. I re-entered the room and found him sitting exactly where I left him. But now he was watching me with an intensity that made my pulse hitch. It wasn't pity. It wasn't shock. It was something quieter, deeper, a decision forming. He reached toward his pocket, then stopped when Beatrice and Julian returned. His hand rested on the table instead, fingers tapping lightly, a habit he had whenever he was thinking through something serious. Beatrice sat next to him and patted his arm, using the sweet tone she reserved for moments when she wanted him to agree with her. "Arthur, we were just discussing how Julian should take over everything. It's time we make things official." Julian straightened up proudly. Arthur's tapping stopped. He lifted his gaze to Beatrice. Is that so? She didn't notice the shift in his voice. She kept smiling. Yes, Eleanor understands. She knows she doesn't need anything from us. My breath caught. So did the tapping. Arthur drew in a slow breath, eyes darkening, not with age, but with realization. I felt the room tilt almost imperceptibly. Something was coming, something neither Beatrice nor Julian saw in the distance. As the conversation moved on, I saw Arthur's hand drift subtly back toward his pocket, toward the envelope he'd almost pulled out earlier. His jaw tightened, his shoulders straightened, and for the first time that evening, Beatrice's confidence flickered just barely, like a candle catching a draft. She didn't know it, but the ground beneath her was already starting to split. And all she had done was give him one more reason to let it. Arthur didn't speak right away. He just sat there, eyes fixed on Beatrice in a way that made the room feel smaller, tighter. The tapping from earlier had stopped completely, replaced by a stillness that felt heavier than any raised voice could have been. I knew that stillness. It was the same one he carried at the hospital when a doctor was about to deliver hard news. It meant he was done listening. Beatrice didn't notice. She poured herself more tea, humming like the night was going exactly how she planned. Arthur, we should finalize things tonight, she said. Julian and I have talked it through. Everything will run smoother once the paperwork is updated. The house, the savings, the accounts. It's time Julian takes charge. Julian puffed up in his seat. I'll make sure everything's handled. Arthur's voice came out low. Handled? Julian grinned. Yeah. Arthur leaned back slightly, studying him. And Eleanor? He asked, tone deceptively casual. Beatrice exhaled, annoyed. Arthur, we've been through this. Eleanor doesn't need anything from the family. She's always been independent. She knows that. She turned to me, expecting agreement. Right? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was afraid any response would shatter the delicate tension in the room. Something inside me warned that this moment wasn't about my voice. It was about Arthur's. He placed both hands on the table and cleared his throat. The subtle scrape of his chair against the floor made Julian pause mid-smirk. I think, Arthur said slowly, it's time I speak. Beatrice forced a smile. Of course, Arthur. Go ahead. We know this is emotional for you. Arthur's jaw flexed. You have no idea how emotional. The room snapped into silence. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a thick envelope, cream-colored, sealed, worn at the edges, like it had been handled many times before. He set it on the table with a quiet thud, but it sounded louder than anything else had all night. Julian's eyes narrowed. What's that? Arthur looked at me first, long enough for my throat to tighten, then turned to them. That, he said, is the truth. Beatrice's smile faltered just a little. Arthur, what are you talking about? Arthur slid the envelope toward the center of the table. Before we discuss any paperwork updates, I think it's time you two stop pretending you've earned control over anything. Julian scoffed. Come on, Arthur, sit. Sit. Arthur snapped. Julian sank back down. Arthur opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers, documents, bank statements, savings records. Not detailed files, just simple proof. Enough to make the blood drain from Beatrice's face the moment she recognized them. I've spent the last year reviewing everything, Arthur said. Every payment I made, every dollar I sent to support my granddaughter. He looked straight at Beatrice. And everything you took. Beatrice's hand twitched. Arthur, that's not. Don't. His voice struck like a hammer. You told me Eleanor never cashed the support I sent her for school. You told me she refused the help. That she said she didn't want my money. Julian sat up straighter, suddenly unsure. Arthur continued, voice steady and merciless. You said Eleanor didn't care, that she wanted nothing to do with what I gave her. But here, he held up a statement, is every deposit I made. And here, another sheet, is every transfer you made to Julian with that money. Julian's mouth fell open. What? Beatrice, what is he talking about? Beatrice went pale. Arthur, wait. I can explain. There's no explanation. He pointed at the papers. You stole from your own daughter. My stomach dropped. I knew Beatrice favored Julian. I knew she'd hidden things, but I didn't know it was this. Arthur turned to me, and his expression softened just a fraction. You were supposed to have enough to finish college comfortably. I gave you enough for books, housing, food, yet you worked double shifts. You skipped meals. His voice wavered. You thought you were a burden. I swallowed hard. I didn't know, I whispered. She never told me. He nodded, eyes dark with pain. I know you didn't. Julian shot to his feet. Beatrice, you said. Sit down. Arthur repeated, louder this time. Julian obeyed instantly. Arthur pushed himself to standing, steadying on his cane. The room froze. Even the air felt afraid to move. Earlier, he said, looking at Beatrice, you told Eleanor not to expect anything from you. Beatrice's lips parted. Arthur, I didn't mean. He raised a hand. Good. The word hung in the air like a blade. Good, he repeated, voice rising with the kind of authority that made the walls seem to vibrate, because everything now goes to her. Beatrice's face collapsed like someone had dropped a stone on her chest, and the shock rippled outward. Arthur, no. No, you can't. Julian sputtered. Arthur, this isn't fair. What about me? What about you? Arthur turned on him, eyes blazing. Everything I gave you, you wasted. At every chance you squandered, and your mother encouraged it. Julian's jaw clenched. I didn't know the money was hers. You didn't ask, Arthur shot back. Because you never cared where it came from. You only cared that it came. Beatrice grabbed the back of her chair, breathing unevenly. Arthur, please, let's talk about this privately. We'll talk about it now, Arthur said. In front of the family, in front of Eleanor, because this is not a negotiation. He pulled out a second envelope, thinner, crisp, freshly sealed. This, he said, is my updated will. Beatrice shook her head violently. Arthur, no. Julian needs to grow up, Arthur said. And you need to live with the consequences of the choices you made. He set the envelope directly in front of me. My hands trembled as I looked at it, too stunned to touch it. Eleanor, Arthur said softly, you have been the only one who showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. You took me to my appointments. You sat with me when I was tired. You visited because you cared, not because you wanted something. He looked at Beatrice. And you punished her for it. Beatrice was crying now. Silent, panicked tears. Arthur wasn't finished. I am leaving the house, the savings, and everything else to Eleanor. Effective immediately. Julian knocked over his chair. This is insane. Beatrice, do something. Beatrice grabbed Arthur's arm. Arthur, she's manipulating you. She's turning you against us. Arthur jerked his arm free. She didn't have to turn me against you. You did that yourselves. I finally found my voice. Arthur, why tonight? He looked at me with a sad smile. Because I needed to see who you all were when I wasn't speaking. And tonight, you showed me. He faced Beatrice and Julian one final time. Eleanor stayed calm. You two showed your true colors. Beatrice reached out again, desperate. Arthur, please. He stepped back, shaking his head. You told her not to expect anything from you. Now you can expect nothing. From me. The room cracked open. Silence. Shock. Collapse. Beatrice sank into her chair, shaking. Julian stared at the floor, stunned, and Arthur placed his hand gently on my shoulder. It's over, he said. But none of us, especially Beatrice, would realize just how true that was until much later. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet, like the world had shifted a few inches, and everyone was still trying to find their balance. Beatrice called twice, then 3 times, each message more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. Julian didn't call at all. I heard from a relative that he'd stormed around the neighborhood complaining that everything had been stolen from him, never once admitting why Arthur made the decision he did. Arthur, meanwhile, seemed lighter. I drove him to an appointment in downtown Seattle, and he walked a little straighter, breathed a little easier. When we sat together in the waiting room, he nudged my arm gently. You did well, he said. I didn't do anything, I replied. He shook his head. You stayed decent. That's harder than fighting. Later that week, we met with a lawyer to finalize the paperwork he'd already prepared. There were no dramatic signatures, no grand announcements, just a quiet confirmation that everything Beatrice and Julian assumed they controlled no longer belonged to them. Arthur didn't look triumphant. He looked relieved. When we left the office, the winter air felt sharper, cleaner. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching traffic move across the city. You know, he said, being loved shouldn't feel like begging. I swallowed, feeling something loosen in my chest. I guess I kept hoping they'd change. They won't, he said gently. But you can choose differently. And for the first time in years, I believed him. Even now, when I think about that night, I don't remember the shock or the shouting first. I remember the moment Arthur placed his hand on my shoulder. The quiet certainty that I wasn't invisible after all. Losing my family the way I knew them hurt. But gaining the truth set something free inside me. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it stands up slowly, clears its throat, and speaks for you when you're too tired to fight. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You're not alone.